Not very long ago, I discovered something which revolutionized my way of understanding how domes sit in architecture. This new understanding has let me see what's really happening with the structure of domes from any viewpoint, and therefore to be able to draw them more accurately. So watch this and then you'll know as much as I do. The easiest way to understand the key point in drawing domes from any perspective is to go back to our basic one-point perspective diagrams. Think of a cube, but this is a cube we're looking straight on, and so the vanishing point is right behind it in the middle. Let's put another cube above it, and let's put another cube below it. What I want to do is to pay attention just to the silhouette. It looks much the same, but reversed. I could draw another cube anywhere and we get a different shape. The important fact is that we only see this cube as a square when we look at it straight on with the vanishing point right behind it. Now I want to consider a sphere. It also has the vanishing point right behind it. Well, we don't have any angles to kind of do this, but we can understand what's happening. So now I want to put another sphere that's higher than this sphere. So it's above the vanishing point. And again, I can see that the perspective angles go back to the same vanishing point. And I can do the same for another sphere down here. Now this sphere I'm looking down somewhat on. And I can even do a sphere out to the side. And now I do the same thing. I colour in the silhouettes. And what we see is that while with the square cubes, we only see the square shape when we view straight on with eye level in the center. With our spheres, the silhouette is a circle regardless of how high, low, or to the side, or any combination we view the shape from. This is the fundamental principle that we have to bear in mind when we draw domes. It makes drawing domes from any angle accurately so much easier. The second basic perspective principle, which is incredibly relevant for domes, is to remember ellipses. So here we have a column that's made up of various stacked cylindrical sections. And in the center, where these two sections join, it's a straight line. Although if we were to look down on top of the column, we know it would be a circle. Now, perspective tells us that if this is where our eye level is, then as these joins go up above eye level, they start to curve. And as we go down, they curve again, though in the opposite direction. Why this is relevant to domes is because domes usually sit on what we call a drum, which is really just a cylinder. If this was the top of our drum and our dome was to sit on it, then it would look something like this. But the reality is that the rest of the sphere is hidden from viewing there. But this is the effect we get when we look straight on at a dome. Much like in this case, basically a straight shape with the top half of a dome. And if we think of a dome as being a sphere, we can easily imagine the rest of the sphere reflected inside the dome. This is perhaps the most straightforward type of dome to draw. However, if we go upwards, and so our drum goes above eye level, if this now becomes our drum top here, and we want to put a dome on top, so this becomes the side of our drum, and again, we have the whole circle inside the drum, but we see less of it now because we're looking up. More of the sphere is hidden inside the drum. So we do not see a half circle, we see a crescent shape. A bit like in this dome, where more of the dome is hidden by the drum. And we also see less of the top of the dome because it curves over out of sight. What if our dome is sitting on the very top of this very tall drum? And so here is our sphere, but this is the top of our drum. And so all of this part of the sphere is hidden inside the drum. What we see is a relatively thin crescent. The very top of the dome is going to be something like this on the other side of the surface. And so this is the effect we get in a dome when we're quite close and we're looking up and we see the dome towering above us. What it means is we see a lot less of the dome than we see if we're looking at it straight on. And that's the sort of effect we get in this view, which is actually the same dome as we have here, but from much closer looking up. We just get this crescent shape. But the important thing for domes is to realize that however much of the dome we see, what we do see is an arc of a circle. This is part of half a circle. This is part of half a circle. This is part of half a circle. But that much of it can be obscured. And so in this one, there is actually a full circle here. And to understand that helps me to draw this with the roundness that it needs. And of course it works exactly the same way if we're looking down on a dome. The entire sphere sits in our drum, but more of it is revealed to us because of the angle. And because we're slightly more over the top of it and not side on, the top of the dome will be somewhere such as here. It's important if we need to center more architectural detail on top. And we can see that here, where we're looking down on this dome. In fact, the same dome that we've just looked at from two other heights. We're very high looking down. Then let's say this is the top of the drum. Then there's very little of the spherical shape that's been hidden by the dome. And the top of the dome is going to be much more in a place such as this, because we're almost looking down on our dome. This is the closest drawing I've done where we're almost looking down on the top of a dome. And these domes do have drums that are actually built into the structure. We need to see the actual circle as sitting inside these shapes. But the important thing to remember is that for every dome we're looking at, the line that forms the silhouette of that dome is always a half circle. Now in practice, there's often a lot hidden here and here because of decoration. More of these sections are hidden simply by the perspective angle as the perspective angle increases, such as in here. Detail that we can see very clearly if we're looking down on the same dome. But understanding this helps us not just when we're drawing the basic outline of the dome on the drum from whatever perspective we're viewing it from. It also helps us when it comes to adding all the decorative elements that sit on a dome correctly. Let's look at that now.
G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If you're finding this helpful, hit the subscribe button and notifications and find out when I post new videos. And if there's something I haven't taught on, then please leave a comment and tell me what you'd like me to make a video on. Let's get back to our domes.
How does this understanding affect decorative features on domes? Here we have a dome. You often see windows or ornamentation that wraps around the circular side of the dome. Now, if we're looking straight onto a dome, let's say there's a row of windows. And of course, they appear to get closer together as they move further away around the arc of the circle. There might even be another row higher up of smaller windows. Here we have our dome again, but this time we want to be looking up from below. So we'll do our half ellipse. Now this straight line become like these lines. As they move higher away from eye level, they curve more and more. So let's say eye level's about here. So we're looking up from eye level, so it's curving So when we get to this line, it's going to curve more than this line. And this line is further away again. So it's going to curve more. And then when we put our windows in, we get this effect. And we see how the base of the windows move down as the imaginary line they sit on moves closer to the sides. And it's the same. This line up the top. What we don't do is have a series of parallel lines. Now domes, particularly large domes, often have their structural ribs emphasized in a decorative way, and they often also have horizontal bands of elements such as these windows or even decorative reliefs. And so this understanding of how domes are formed and what their underlying shape is helps us to place these structural and decorative elements far more accurately. With the structural ribs, what I often see is something that looks more like this, whereas the shapes can be almost triangular in the center and then almost a section of arc on the end and something in between. Whereas we need to think sphere, we need to think a ball. Now the line straight on, if there is one, will appear straight with this perspective. These segments will become narrower at the base because of the effect of the surface curving away from us. But at the top, they will curve with a greater fullness as they move to the surface, because they have to transition bit by bit from what appears to be a straight line to actually being a quarter of a circle. There we have it. Now what if we have a row of windows in between every second rib? And we get something like this. However, if we're looking up from below, so instead of being a straight line, the side of our drum is half an ellipse, then that means that this straight line from this side-on view also becomes half an ellipse. But we also know that as these ellipses move further up away from eye level, the curve becomes greater. And so we know that this curving line, that while it may not be a line, but it's the line formed by the windows, is above this one, it actually is not parallel, but it curves at a greater angle, which means this band here is going to be narrower at the edges. And that's what we need to remember then when we put our windows in. That the gap between the bottom of the window and the edge of the drum decreases as they move further around to the side of the drum. While this is a parallel line to this one in this perspective, it's not a parallel line to this one in this perspective. The other thing to realize is that whereas in this side-on view, these ribs come and meet at a point, in this view, in effect, our ball, our sphere, is tipped away from us. So if we look at this conceptualized view, and if we just imagine the drum disappearing for a minute, we would be able to see, if you like, the South Pole here. Now that means that, in effect, the North Pole is on the other side of our ball. So the point where all of these ribs meet is actually over the horizon of the top of our dome, which means this might be more this line, and therefore there's a gap between each of the ribs at that point. So it's going to look something like this. And if we have a decorative feature such as this lantern sitting on top, then it's going to be centered on our North Pole, which is over on the other side. We can think of it as like a straw poking right the way through. It's really a bit small, isn't it? But we don't really see any of the base of our lantern because it's all hidden over the horizon of our dome. But if we keep this understanding of the spherical nature and of the way as we get lower and lower down looking up, we actually don't see the top of the dome, it helps us draw the detail much more accurately. And if we think of these horizontal bands of decorative or architectural features as like the joins of segments in a column, then we can appreciate how as they get higher, they need to become more rounded. And we can see an example of this in this drawing of Karlskirche in Vienna, how we don't see where these segments join because they join over the horizon, so to speak. And that we also don't see the base of this lantern because it also is sitting over the horizon. Domes are a great architectural feature to draw. And if we understand their relationship to spheres and how spheres work in perspective, sitting on drums, it will be so much easier for us to see what's happening in our reference and therefore to draw it accurately. Time to draw some domes. Have fun.